Hello, welcome to my show. Today's guest is Emma Liebler, and Mr. Liebler is somebody that I met in 2007 because I was working for the St. Clair Shore Times, and they said, this is our poet laureate, you have to interview him. Loved the interview, and then years later, I see you're still very active. You're a professor at Wayne State University. You've probably been a professor long before.
40 years.
Oh.
I look really young.
So. Yes, you do. And I remember the last time I saw you, you were a keynote speaker for Detroit Working Writers.
I was.
Do you remember what I said to you?
You subpoenaed me? No.
Something similar.
I think you mentioned the show, didn't you? Or no?
No. I said that I met you exactly 10 years ago and you haven't changed a bit.
Oh,
and you said, "Oh yeah,
okay.
I know." Yes, you took full credit for looking good. Okay, and since then, you have been incredibly active. Like I said, with different things, including that today we're going to talk about All Access Cafe.
Yes.
Yes, and a new book that you're coming out with, and you've published over a dozen books easily, but this one is the most recent one.
Yeah, it's due out on December 1st officially, but it's a 2020 date.
Okay.
So it will come out before Christmas, and it's a great Christmas gift, if I might say so myself. Mm-hmm. And it's 500 pages or so. It's an anthology called Respect, the Poetry of Detroit Music. Yeah. And in the book, actually, I'll just mention because they kind of summarized it pretty nicely on the back. It says, collection of poems and lyrics shows the global impact of Detroit music. Grammy winners, Pulitzer Prize winners, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees, and poet laureates. Included are icons such as Eminem, June Jordan, Fred Sonic Smith, Rita Dove, Jack White, Robbie Robertson, Paul Simon, Nikki Giovanni, Philip Levine, Sasha Frere-Jones, Patricia Smith, Billy Bragg, Codrescu, Toi Derricotte, and Cornelius Eady.
Wow.
So, and a lot of people from the Detroit area are in here, too.
How long did it take you? This book seems pretty heavily...
Well, we didn't expect it to be like that big, for one thing. But Jim Daniels, who's a very well-known poet who has been at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, but he's from Warren originally. So he does a lot of writing about Detroit in his own poetry and stories and stuff. So we got together. His main publisher is Michigan State University Press, and we talked to them, and they liked this idea. And then we just started, we knew there was certain poems that were about Detroit music that we definitely wanted. Some we wanted to try for, like some of the super famous people in there. And everybody came through, and it was pretty much a genuine effort on behalf of all the poets involved because, of course, there's no money in art, as Jim Gustafson used to say. So we did not have an expense permissions budget or anything like that. And people came through, and even the famous people, and were, very much into the project. They love Detroit music, so they're in the book now.
Yes, and like when you were saying art doesn't really make a living, but you are so active.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways that probably don't pay. How do you have the energy for that? But I know that when you are a key speaker, you did mention that one of the ways, as just a part of being an artist, is that you do have to go out there. It might not be people's favorite thing, but it's necessary.
No, you have to do that, and I certainly have done that over the years. I think that for a lot of us, people like myself or even Jim, there comes a time where, you can be paid for what you do. You just have to know where you're looking and I never looked back. I never worried about money. And, things as you go through a career just came together. So, I'm not rich from poetry, but I've traveled all over the world. I work for the State Department doing cultural events. I mean, cultural lectures and readings and music and classes all over the place, from Germany to Afghanistan and the West Bank and everywhere. So there's that kind of income that comes, and then there's many different offers that come through. Can you come and do a reading at this place in another state, maybe for $1,000 or something like that. And, if you're up for it, then you do it, And so I guess it's what I was mentioning there. It's kind of doing it for the right reasons, not thinking about compensation, because it will come if you are true to it.
That's a very good advice.
Yeah.
And sometimes writers that are beginning, because I do coach some writers. I've been involved with the writing
I know
community for a long time. And sometimes that mentality, it blocks your creativity. And so you get caught up with, is this making money? Is this? And then you get so caught up in that, and then you're not creating anything anyway. So really, you're not making the money and you're not creating anything. So at least if you create something, you'll be happy and proud of that.
Yeah.
And then who knows what comes out of it?
That's right.
Who knows what comes out of it?
Absolutely.
Yes. And now what I'd like to know, so this All Access Cafe.
Yes.
Is this something, when did this, you said it's a Knight Foundation funded program. When did that start?
Well, it started this year.
Okay.
The award was given in the fall of 2018. That is the program, and people out there may see it. It comes around every year or 2 years. It's called the Detroit Challenge Grant, and that's where anybody who wants to can submit project ideas, sort of the elevator speech, in a tweet form. So whatever that is, 140 characters or something like that. And they take all those into account, and they have judges. Then they'll decide, let's say, on 50 or 60 that they will put into the finalist camp. And then from the 50 or 60, then they might pick 45 to get the grant. Mm-hmm. So that's that. I've gotten that a couple of times. You can't count on any of that sort of thing happening. It's just always a blessing when it does. But for the Detroit Lit Walk in 2013, I got a Knight grant. They thought that was a pretty good idea.
What was that idea?
It was the literary walk that I started down in Midtown. Mm-hmm. We do it every fall. We just did it a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And then I sprung off one in my own city, since I'm the poet laureate in St. Clair Shores. So we did our first one in St. Clair Shores this past June, and it was really successful. So we have that. I started it originally in Chelsea. I was the poet in residence at the Chelsea Library a number of years ago now. And my job was to curate a few programs and come up with ideas. And one thing I'd always wanted to do was a literary walk, which is minimal walking, but you need a place like downtown Chelsea for it, because they have storefronts on Main Street, or a place like Rochester could work. They have a place on places on Main Street, like art galleries, eateries, and other places, a bookstore. So the plan was to put a couple of writers at each of these places, and then between, say, noon and 5, and people walk from place to place to place, but they're all very, very close, and they get a sampling of different writers from the area, from Michigan, from the United States. I don't know if we had anybody international yet for that, but that's how it works, And so I started that, and then that was many years ago. It's still going on, but I'm really not part of it anymore. But people in Detroit asked couldn't we do this here? And the difference at that time between Chelsea and Detroit was Chelsea had a lot of money, and Detroit had none. So I started planning how to raise funds, and I pitched it to Knight, and they funded it, and it's been going ever since. I think this year was 8 or 9, the 9th one that we've had.
So, and then now you have for All Access. Mm-hmm. What is that one about?
Well, the All Access Grant is another idea maybe this is the lesson for listeners and viewers, was an idea I had for a number of years. I started performing with Sean Forbes, who is a deaf hip-hop artist and quite well known, especially in that community and in Detroit too. And so we became friends, and his good friend was a producer or an engineer for Eminem, and Sean was working out of that studio, 54 Sound. And my friend, who became my friend, was a bass player and a musician, Steve King. So once Steve and I started working, and we started the Coyote Monk Poetry Band, which is still in existence today. But through that, I worked with Sean. I was on a track on his album and so on and so forth. And we started doing, Steve and I would open for him at these deaf events in different places like Los Angeles and around Michigan. And then I ended up doing that in Israel with him a few years ago now. And so going to these things now, we're doing music and poetry. That's another thing that I do. And the audience, it's being signed and stuff, but the audience is really enjoying it. And I'm like, wow, I just didn't think about that. People would come up and say, in sign language through an interpreter that they really like this poem or that poem. They really like this piece and that piece. And I just started thinking, wow, it would be great to bring all these different audiences together in one, get people to come and see, quote, famous poets and musicians, but also famous, differently abled poets and musicians or writers and musicians. And that was the All Access Cafe. So I pitched it a number of times to different granting agencies, and they turned it down. I guess they didn't think it was as genius as I did. And then out of the blue, in the fall of 20, I pitched it in 2018 to the Detroit Challenge. And lo and behold, that fall, they called me and said I received the grant for the full amount that I had, put in place to budget it for a couple of years. And they agreed to it.
And this wasn't even a matching grant.
It is a matching grant.
It is a matching grant.
Which is great and I matched it. Mm-hmm. I'm very, very close now. Mm-hmm. And so the money's there, and we're doing these programs down at Third Man Record, Jack White's place. And it goes over really well. People, just what I planned happens. People from the different communities come out to see their favorite poet or musician, and then they get exposed to others as well on the program.
So if I understand it correct, did you already start it before you even applied?
No, I wanted to. I wanted to do it right, and to do it right, it would take money. I could put a lit walk together on bare bones and things like that, but that's something that was really going to, take more money, a bigger budget, because that involved some flights, and it involved hotel rooms, and it involved, people that are, touring all the time in their fields. So I knew I needed a budget. I kept pitching it, this grant, that grant, and it got turned down. Then finally it came through. So that took like 5 years since I started.
Wow. Yeah. See, this is sometimes writers, artists.
We'll
get like one rejection, two rejections, and it's like, and here you are, and you're very established to top it off, and well connected, and it happens to everybody.
Oh, it always does. I mean, I've heard even down to the bare minimum of being poets and writers where you send material out and stuff. I mean, a lot of famous writers will tell you they get rejected too all the time. Mm-hmm. They say that a writer, if they publish 10% of what they send out, then they're at the top of their game. Hemingway, as an example, sent out 119 stories before they accepted the first one. So that means 119 were rejected.
It's perseverance.
You have to.
And lack of attachment. It seems like that was, especially in your case, you're not attached so much to the outcome. You're just going.
Right. Well, I'm just, I sometimes say, or in recent years, I'm an ideas guy. I'm not the guy to know how to do the income taxes and all that and so forth. I know how to pay artists, I know how to book artists, and I know how to make programs successful.
Okay.
The rest of it, the advertising and stuff, has got to be somebody else.
And you've done it very successfully.
I think so.
Yes, you have. So this is the All Access Cafe. Is this an event coming up right here?
Yeah, this is coming up. It depends on when this airs, but it's still worth noting. This is coming up on November 7th.
Okay.
And we're in collaboration with Third Man and the Detroit Public Library.
Okay.
So what we do is, as this shows, we either before or after have a panel with the artists, both the disabled and abled artists who appear. And we just have this open forum for them at the library. And so this is making reference that that's going to happen at the Detroit Library on November 6th at 6 o'clock. And we'll have some of the past people and the new people on that panel because their air conditioning was out in the summer. We had to kind of miss a couple of them. But not all these people will be there. Excuse me. Ed Sanders is a really famous poet and a fiction writer, and he's really famous for his book on Manson. That was the first Manson book called The Family. It was a bestseller back in 70, 71.
Okay.
And he started a group called the Fugs, which was very popular in the 60s and, all that kind of stuff. So he is going to be on the panel too. But this program here is a pretty good example of the All Access Cafe. You have a person like Ed Sanders and then Robert Bradley. He's a longtime Detroit recording artist, used to be with Robert Bradley and the Black Water Surprise. He is sight impaired. And then Jim Ferris is a really great poet and professor and the head of disability studies. He's kind of at the epicenter of this it's a whole area I've learned over these 5 years. It's a whole area of studies and stuff at universities. He heads it up there. And then Samaj, she was a great Detroit poet, and then she got married and she's been living in Flint. She's still a great poet, but she hasn't been in Detroit in a long time. So this is going to be one of her first appearances.
Busy being married.
And having kids.
Yes.
But she just did a new book, and she's very unique and a really great person. So we're happy to have her back. She used to be here all the time back in the 90s and stuff when we were
She probably once she gets herself together. I was like that for a while. My kids are not that old right now, but then they're just. Oh, I got this stuck right here. I'll come up.
And then Sinclair and Tino will be on the program. They're kind of known musicians and poets.
Okay. And then I have, it's not going to the other. I'll come up. Okay. And what is this?
Well, that book was another. We got all the right stuff coming up here. This one is another story. I've been teaching labor studies at Wayne State since '91. It's kind of a side job. I'm in the English department, but I also work in that department. And in that department, or in that class I was doing, which was labor through the arts, there were no books, no anthologies that I could go to. So I had to Xerox a lot of stuff to bring into class. And then I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to pitch a book that has this kind of writing in it. And my idea it was actually my idea originally for what this book became in a way. But I wanted to have poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction all in one place.
Okay. And
a lot of it's the stuff I used. So with that book, I put it all together, a similar thing. Everybody participated gratis in it. And just to kind of preserve the working class art across the country and in Michigan. And got it together, got ready to put it out with a major publisher. And at that moment, the major publishers sort of backed out because they found out that the Oxford University Press was doing a similar project. And they were afraid that they couldn't compete with that university. Now, there's a story behind all that, too. But so anyway, I had the book. It was all together. I got word from the Coffee House Press, which is a pretty prestigious small press in Minneapolis, that they were interested in the book. And I kept hearing they're interested, because it was just laying dormant in my basement. Because it was probably ready to go to print in 2005 at the latest. So at some point when everything went kaput there a couple of years after, I did hear from the press, Coffee House, and they said, look, we're really backed up. We want to do this book, but it's not going to be until the 2010, this was 2007, until the 2010 books come out. And at that point, I thought that's fine because otherwise it's just going to lay on a desk in my basement, and then I'll put it in my archives at Wayne State, and it will become the great unpublished working class book. Well, they called and they made good on it, and they put it into production. Well, another thing, it came out in 2010. 2010, out of all the years in recent years, was the beginning of that major protests going on at in Wisconsin when the governor killed unions and it said teachers couldn't negotiate and government workers couldn't, and they went on. There was a huge strike, and Madison, Wisconsin became the epicenter of this kind of battle. And which put labor and working class on the minds of people all across the country. And boom, this book comes out then and gets all kinds of press because here's a literary book essentially about something that's in the news. Right. And it sold a lot of copies all around the country.
Yeah.
You can tell where pockets where they sell and stuff, and they sold all, and we had book signings from Los Angeles to New York and in between, and it was great.
Well, that is great. I mean, and then
so that was perseverance too.
And you have this that you sent
Okay, these are the three that came out from the Wayne State University Press. The poetry one, which is the one I Want to Be Once, are new poems. And in it, there are poems of Detroit. I think my Afghanistan poems are in there, I'm pretty sure. And then I do these things I call American Psalms, which are short, little, kind of sometimes cynical, hilarious, or meant to be funny anyway. So that came out, and then Bob Seger's House came out in the fall, and that's a collection of short stories by a lot of well-known Michigan writers. It was kind of an anniversary issue. But Heaven Was Detroit was another project that I pitched, and the Wayne State University Press wanted to do it, and I started putting all the pieces in place, and it took a couple of years. Constant working on it with the editing and proofreading and all that kind of stuff. But it came out, it sold really well. For a long time, when it first came out, it was on the Amazon. It was always in the top 10 sellers for books on music or something like that. You know how they break the categories down. So it then went back to a more normal spot. It still had done well. And then when the ebook version came out, which the ebook is out on all those now, sales rose again on it. So, well, like I said, you're very productive, and I don't know how you fit all this teaching in between. I know you're even John Lamb's Spring-Fed Writers and Music Series. You're a part of that as well. It's on February 26th, 7 p.m. in Royal Oak. I'm actually a part of that, too, for a different date, for January 22nd. Right, I wish we were on the same one. Yeah, but we'll run into each other. We are going to run into each other. Yeah, we are going to run into each other. It may be All Access Cafe. Yes, exactly. Yeah. But I only have a few minutes left, and given your wisdom and your productivity level and everything, if you could just share,
just something that you want to leave the audience with, especially those aspiring writers or, even established writers. Actually, I've read so many that sometimes they get very disappointed or disheartened and quit. But anyway, something that you want to leave.
Well, it's
the
really
audience
easy
with.
to do that. I mean, nobody likes, I mentioned this to my students in creative writing classes and other classes at Wayne State is, people don't like it if you tell them you don't like their shoes or their hair or their clothes. They get really offended by that. So imagine what it's like when you get a rejection on something from the deepest part of your soul, which is your poetry or stories, and they're telling you, no, it's not, at least for them, it's not good enough. So it's easy to get discouraged. But I think what I do anyway, is I don't think about all the things you just said because then I get really tired. I just kind of keep looking forward, and I don't look backwards. I really don't do that. And moving forward, it's kind of like in your wake, things are being accomplished. But my focus is always on the next thing that I'm involved with, and which I am. The next thing is a memoir Wayne State's going to do, and I've been writing
Your
it.
memoir?
Yes.
Oh, excellent.
I've been writing it for a number of summers. It should have been done years ago.
Excellent.
And I've gotten grants to complete writing it, but I finally did this summer. And now it's got to go through the proofreading stages and the piecing it together type of thing. So
nothing has stopped.
Nothing stops, and now I was just in your green room emailing my friend who wants to do my collected poetry book out in Los Angeles. So, what the hell?
What the hell? That's right. And you know what? We're gonna have to have you back when you get your memoir done. I'm very interested in that. I think
it's better than I thought.
I'm sure it's very good because I remember when I interviewed you in 2007, you said quite a bit about your background and stuff that was really intriguing. So I'd love to read more.
Thanks.
So thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.
I look forward to connecting with you, especially in 2020.
Yes.
Clear vision, okay?
Early 2020.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.